Hello, hello, hello. How are you guys doing today? Okay, today I want to talk about a true crime case that is very important to me. A true crime case that I have covered extensively for several years now. And about every 3 to 4 months, I do a follow-up video about, because there seems to be new information that comes up about this case. And the case that I am referring to is the serial killer Baumeister and the killings that took place at his home at Fox Hollow Farms. I get direct messages from people all the time and emails asking me why I haven't done further updates on this case, why I am not continuing to talk about this case. And the main reason why I haven't continued to do videos about this case is because there really haven't been that many updates. There hasn't been that much media attention about it. And so there's not that many updates to do. The last time that I did an update talking about this case, I talked about new bones that they had found at Fox Hollow Farms. I talked about people had reached out to me with personal stories that they had to the case. But other than that, there hasn't really been a lot that has happened. And until main media attention focuses on this case, that will be where this case stands. It's interesting because this is a case that, you know, as it was going on, is a case that I have followed for quite some time. I'll give you a brief history of my interest in this case through the years. But, you know, that's kind of been the case. It's interesting because when I think about this case of Baumeister and his victims at Fox Hollow Farms, one of the things that's the most interesting to me is that as one of the most prolific serial killers that we have ever seen in the United States, it is one of the cases that I believe has a huge cover-up, number one, but two, I also believe that it has been one of the most forgotten cases, and its victims, the most forgotten victims, which makes me very, very sad. So for those of you that do not know about the case that I'm talking about, the case is about the serial killer Baumeister, and he was a serial killer that lived in Westfield, Indiana. That is on the north side of Indiana. It's in a suburb. It's a very wealthy suburb of Indianapolis, and he was also known as the I-70 killer. But he would take gay men to his home when his wife and children were gone, and he would, they were typically intoxicated, and he would get them in the pool, and they had an indoor pool in their house, and then he would strangle them with a pool hose, and then he would kill them, and then he would take them to he would dispose of their bodies and take them to a burn pile in the woods. I covered this case so extensively that I don't know how deep to get into the details of the case. At that time, there's been a few news coverage things of this. The last one that I watched was a coverage by WRTV in Indianapolis that did it. I think that was about 2 years ago, and they talked to some of the families of several of the victims that they had found. That was probably the best, and I think the most honoring of the victims of any coverage that I've ever seen done by it. But at that time, what had happened was that Baumeister, they found bones on his property, and they wanted to investigate. His wife would not let them on the property. At one point, he had their son at their lake house. She wanted the police to intervene, and so she allowed them to come on the property. And then they came on the property. That's when they started finding bone fragments in the woods. Baumeister fled to Canada, and he eventually ended his life. And I believe that was in 1996. Since then, they have identified, I believe, about a fourth of the victims at Fox Hollow Farms. All of the victims were gay men. Many of them were transient. Many of them were sex workers. And many of them were people that were never reported missing. It was an entire community of gay men that were literally forgotten. The reason why this story is so important to continue to be told is, especially in a social climate that we have right now, with so much focus on LGBTQIA plus people, and as well as, you know, trans women of color being one of the highest populations of violence and murder in our country right now, is that I think that timing in society is really, really important. At that time that these crimes were being committed, the gay community, you know, this is at the time that we're coming right off the end of the AIDS crisis, and it was easy for gay men, especially gay men that were sex workers or were transient or had substance abuse issues, to be forgotten. This was a time, we are not talking about a time of overall acceptance by family members. We still don't live in that time today. So many of these families didn't even know that their loved ones were missing, did not report them missing, and still have not reported them missing as of today. Literally just forgotten people. And it breaks my heart. And I think that one of the reasons why this case wasn't solved at the time, with so many victims, was because it was primarily targeted towards the gay community. And I think that, every once in a while I'll see articles come up from, local, gay organizations that will talk about that time period or talk about the murders. And what they'll talk about is that the police, were investigating the murders, but they weren't fully invested like they would be invested in other murders that were happening at that time. Other murders that did happen at that time in Indianapolis that I remember. And so we were a throwaway community. The reason why I got initially interested in this case is because I got sober. My sobriety date is December 17th of 1994. So this is, a week out from that. We don't borrow time in recovery, but should I make it to next Tuesday, I will have had 30 years of continuous sobriety. At the time that these crimes were going on was at the time that I was at the height of my addiction. Her Baumeister was going to bars in Indianapolis, gay bars specifically, that I was going to in Indianapolis, and he was picking out random men, a lot of them that were intoxicated, that weren't around a lot of other people, and he was taking them home to his home in Westfield. When I originally heard about this case and then later saw the A&E investigative reports with Bill Curtis story about this, I very quickly felt that I could have been one of these victims. That was how I initially got interested in this case and started following this case. I can remember my roommate, she and I back in the day watching the investigative reports, and I can remember them talking about this case. You can watch it on YouTube. I think the case is called something like, it's something about his wife at the time, because he was married and he did have kids, and they, did not, I think it actually had 3 kids, not 2 kids. And, they had no idea that he was doing this. He and his wife owned a chain of stores called the Save-A-Lot stores that were thrift stores in Indianapolis. They were very wealthy, but they were also having some financial problems at that time that they believe led a lot to what her Baumeister was doing. So my roommate and I, we watched this documentary, and I can remember she was like, this could be you. Like, they describe in the documentary the kind of men that he was looking for, and they said they were between like 5'9" and 5'10", shorter than he was. I'm 5'10", 5'10 and a half, and they said that, they were usually intoxicated, they were dark hair, they were thin. I was a lot thinner then. I kind of fit the description of a lot of the men that he was picking out. And so, I fit that demographic, and a lot of people that I knew fit that demographic. And so it felt very personal to me, not to mention that I can remember going out to bars and they would, have flyers that said, be careful and things like that. I mean, this was something that was known in the gay community in Indianapolis, that people were talking about, that people were afraid that there was a serial killer within our community. And the police didn't really seem to be that interested or that involved in trying to investigate or find out what was going on. And so I followed the case. And then after the documentary came out, a lot of the media attention died. Since that time, I have been somebody that has gotten very, very interested in true crime through the years, and I have followed a lot of cases, and I have a true crime book club, which if you want to join, it's listed in the comment section or the description box below. But in the 4 or 5 years that we've had the true crime book club that I run with my friend Mel, we've read probably at this time 50 or 60 true crime books. Many of them a lot lesser cases, and the victims are paid more honor than the victims of her Baumeister. I've asked myself often, why is this such a forgotten case? Like, why is this the one case that has not gotten a lot of media attention? About 6 months ago, I was reached out to by a producer from a major documentary producer that was trying to put options together for doing a documentary about a series about her Baumeister and the Fox Hollow Farms killings. At that time, the reason they didn't follow through with it was that another documentary team was going to make a documentary about her Baumeister. They also reached out to me. Now, what I have found is that they have come into some problems with going through with this documentary, and now that documentary is not happening either. So this is two documentary production teams that were opted to do a documentary series about Fox Hollow Farms and the murders of her Baumeister, and neither production team is able to go forward with the documentary series, which is very, very interesting to me. When you look up on YouTube, for example, and you look up anything about her Baumeister, there are about, I think, 4 or 5 different things online about him. The majority of them are videos that I have done. I think they're like, John Lorden Arts has covered a documentary that was called The Haunting of Fox Hollow Farms, but even that is about psychics that are going out to Fox Hollow Farms, which is the home of her Baumeister. There's not much media coverage about it. Now, what's interesting to me about that, okay, is that you're talking about a man that killed supposedly at the time that I went out there, because I did go out there, and we'll get to that in just a second. The time that I went out there, the number that I was quoted, I think, was 27 or 28 men that he had killed on that property. The number is even larger than that now. They think that the number is anywhere between 30 and 40 men, possibly. He was also the I-70 killer, okay? So along I-70, when he was going between here and Ohio, and he was taking transient men that were hitchhiking, things like that, and he was strangling them and leaving them on the side of the road. We have no idea how many men he killed then, probably 10 to 20. So you're talking about a number of 40 to 60 victims that this man had, okay? Not to mention that at the time that he was married, and he had children, and he was living on this property where he was doing, it was taking their bodies into the woods, and his child found one of the bodies. The wife covered it up because she didn't really know what it was, because he told her that it was a skeleton of his dad's, because his dad has been a physician. He has a very bizarre upbringing. He has a very bizarre childhood. This is a man that had, like, multiple reports, had, a psych history and things like that, and that the police kind of kept him at a distance. Not to mention that his victims were all men from the gay community. And there's never been a conclusive documentary series, a conclusive book that's ever been written about this case. Is absolutely baffling to me. We did read a book about this in our True Crime Book Club, and it was the best book that we could find at the time, and it was co-written by the person that that owns the home at this time, and it was really, really poorly done. It was one of the worst true crime books that I've ever read in my entire life, and really paid no honor to the victims whatsoever or told their story. It's surprising to me that this is a story that hasn't picked up more traction, or, I watch every documentary, from the worst roommate ever to a full documentary series about this, and this case that has such a prolific number of victims, okay, and is targeted towards a very specific community, has never had a major documentary series done about it, a major documentary film done about it. Just recently, I watched Cross on Prime Television, which is about Alex Cross. It's based on the James Patterson novels, and it has a lot to do with serial killers. And one of the serial killers that he references is her Baumeister, because somebody in the television show is from Indiana. And so that's how they connected, is that the guy would know who her Baumeister is because he's from Indiana. It's baffling to me that the only reason that we would know who her Baumeister is because he's from Indiana, when he has a much higher count of victims than the majority of serial killers that have international documentaries that are made about them. Not to mention that he has a very targeted group of victims that were part of the specifically gay male community, but LGBTQI plus community, that at that time was a very forgotten community on the heels of the AIDS crisis that had just happened, okay? So what I have been told, because in my last video that I did about this, I had been reached out to by 2 people that were very involved in all of this. And what they told me was that they knew people that were involved in this, and that there was a huge cover-up, that there were people, and I've had several people tell me, maybe not go so much into making these videos. I'm not afraid of making these videos, okay, at all. And I feel like it's important to continue to talk about this story because there are so many victims that have not been identified. When I watched the WRTV documentary and they interviewed several of the victims' families, their stories broke my heart. Especially, there was a mother that she was, you know, older in age, and she was like, I thought I was going to die and never know what happened to my son. The one sister of one of the victims, she had worked for her Baumeister at the Save-A-Lot stores when her brother went missing, and her brother knew, or her Baumeister knew, and never told his sister, and she was coming to work every day worried about her brother. I mean, these are real families with real stories. They're real men with real stories that, you know, could have had families of their own, you know, and had friends and did have families of their own, other than, you know, romantic partners and things like that. And these are people that had lives and they had dreams and they had names, and their names need to be known and their names need to be told. But we have to know what their names are first. So I will continue to talk about this, but what I've heard is that there's a huge cover-up, and that people that were in politics and people that were involved in the police investigation and people that were in the coroner's office, and there was a huge cover-up that was done, and there were a lot of people in very powerful positions, men and women, that were part of this cover-up, and that this wasn't just about her Baumeister being a serial killer, that there possibly could have been multiple people that were involved in this. I've heard so many different baffling stories, okay? I've heard that it was him that was working on this alone. I've heard that there was multiple people, that this was a group of people that were doing these things, that they were paying high prices of money. When you go to this place, which is now, there's like multiple homes that are built on this property other than just Fox Hollow Farms, but when I went out there originally, and I went out there for a paranormal investigation, it's my most viewed video on my Peter Vlogs channel. So if you go over to my Peter Vlogs channel and you hit the popular, it'll be the #1 that pulls up. My friends Melissa and Aaron and I was invited out there to do a paranormal investigation because I had covered several videos doing it. We went out there. By the end of it, it just felt weird to me. It just didn't feel right to be out there anymore. But when you go out there, it makes sense that a group of powerful people could have met out there when his wife was gone, you know, knowingly or unknowingly that she left, and that they could have met there and taken people out there possibly to kill for thrill kind of thing. I don't know. There's been a lot of speculation about that. There really hasn't been that much investigation except for private investigators that are out there. Now, recently, in the last couple years, they've started to find more bone fragments and things like that when we were out there, because where it is, they have now put a walking path that's called the Monn Trail in Indianapolis. It is right along the edge of Fox Hollow Farms. When the murders occurred, it was an old train track. Okay, so it did not exist as a walking path. That wouldn't have come till years and years later. Now people are walking right by the property. Okay, there is a creek that runs right by the property. People are finding bone fragments in the creek. They're finding bone fragments when they're walking into the woods, because the woods is no longer just private property. It's public property. It's part of a walking path. So people are continuing to find bone fragments. They have continued to find bone fragments just until last year, and taking cadaver dogs out there. They're continuing to find new evidence, all right? 28 years later, they're continuing to find new evidence on the property of Fox Hollow Farms. Why are they not investigating this further? And what the police will tell you is that we are. And contact I think it's the Indiana University, you know, School of Anthropology or whatever that's doing that's doing the bone testing or whatever they'll say. Contact Indianapolis Police Department if you had somebody that went missing at that time. But they're not doing like a close case investigation on this. And I've always wondered, why is that? Why is this huge group of missing people in Indianapolis? Is it because they're gay? Is it because they're a forgotten group that people just don't care about? You know, I've covered a lot of true crime in the last couple years, having a true crime book club. I've read a lot of true crime on my Peter Watches TV channel. I cover a lot of true crime. A commonality in true crime is that marginalized communities, when victims come from marginalized communities, they are easily forgotten, and people don't dig as hard to find out the answers. And I really, truly believe that's why this is one of the biggest forgotten cases ever, and that people don't really dig that harder into it. So it's important that we continue to talk about it, because if we don't continue to talk about it, it will never be found out. The reason I continue to talk about it was because I think the very first video I ever did about it was called something like I May Have Met a Serial Killer, because I talked about having watched a documentary and I was at the bars at the same time. What then later happened was I made a couple videos about it. I was at a 12-step meeting with my best friend, and I ran into somebody that I used to party with back in the day. And he was newly sober, and my best friend Tanya and I, because she knew the story of her Baumeister, and I had just made a video about it, and we were talking about it, and we were outside talking to him after the meeting, and he was like, do you remember back in the day, and we used to do this, and he was telling these funny stories about us partying together back in the day. And my friend Tanya said, I'm just really glad that you guys didn't end up out at that house and that guy didn't take you and whatever. And he looked at me and he said, do you not remember that we went to an after-hour party there? I was a blackout drinker. I do not remember a lot from most of the times that I drank back in the day. And I said, no, I don't remember that. And he goes, it was you and me and so-and-so. And as soon as he said the name, I remembered that there was a possibility that it could have come out there, because I used to like party hard with this one guy that had since moved to Chicago. And so when he said that name, he goes, it was the three of us. We were out there. The guy wanted us to go swimming, blah, blah, blah. We ended up getting out of there and left. Later, because I had made these videos, I was invited by somebody that does paranormal investigations in Indianapolis. She was very sweet to reach out to me, and she asked me if I wanted to do a paranormal investigation at Fox Hollow Farms, because at this point, this was the only way that you could see the property. So there was a team of paranormal investigators that went out there. My friends Melissa and Aaron went with me, because Melissa and Aaron are people that they do a lot of ghost hunting. They've gone to the abandoned hospitals in Ohio and, you know, Virginia and places like that. And so they've done a lot of these, like, where they stay overnight and whatever. And so I asked them if they wanted to go with me. We went out there to Fox Hollow Farms. I documented the whole thing. I filmed the whole thing. There is a part throughout the night where I asked the owner of the house, I said, can I use the bathroom or whatever? And he said, yeah. And I started walking towards it. And he said, that's where it's like some spa area, like steam room. He goes, but that's where the bathrooms used to be. He goes, how did you know the bathroom? Because it's kind of in a weird area. Like you wouldn't think that there were bathrooms there. He goes, how did you know there were bathrooms there? He goes, you must have been here before. And so that was really what piqued my interest. Was I thought, well, was there a possibility that I really was out here for like an after party with two of my friends and we could have been victims of her Baumeister? I don't know. So we did the paranormal investigation. I did that. So about a year or two ago, I started talking about it on this channel. I started making more videos about it. I had somebody that was a friend of mine back in the day that reached out to me, that told me that somebody that was involved in it had reached out to him. He actually said that he would do an interview with me and he would sit down. He had contacted the FBI, he had contacted the police, and they really didn't want to know the information that was brought to him. And he was brought very specific information, which I shared in my last videos. I had somebody else that I knew that reached out to me, and since that time, I've had probably 4 or 5 people that have reached out to me. All of those people have reached out to the police and the FBI, and they have shown very little interest in the information that they have. And I can tell you the information that all 7 of those people have brought to me, or 6 or 7 of those people have brought to me, is all pretty consistent across the board. All their stories kind of match up, and none of those people know each other, okay? And what it talks about is an involvement of multiple people that were involved in this, and there's a huge cover-up that's been done about this case, that's being done about this case to this day, all right? So people continue to ask me, why are you not doing updates about this case? Why? Well, there really aren't any updates about this case, you know? But one of the questions I keep on asking myself is, what is my connection to this case? You know, in all honesty, at first, I think when I first saw the documentary, it was kind of morbid curiosity. I was interested in true crime. I liked true crime. I think there was a lot of morbid curiosity to it. And it was kind of like, well, if I had been there, then I could have been a victim. And watching this documentary, I used to watch all the A&E investigation documentaries. And then it became, the more that I looked into it, you know, and at the time was reading a lot about LGBTQI plus history in our country. And what I realized was that these murders were allowed to happen over and over and over again, because it wasn't just about a serial killer, but it was about abusing a certain marginalized community of our country, the gay community. And so it was really about murdering a certain population that was allowed to happen because police were not getting that involved at the time. When you go back and you watch interviews that were done of people that were holding positions within the gay community at that time, they were demanding things from the police, and the police were doing very, very little. They were saying that they were doing a lot, but they were doing very, very little. And then the investigation just stopped after he passed away. And so what I believe in looking at LGBTQI plus history is that these murders were to some degree allowed to happen because it was part of a marginalized community that was continuing to be abused over and over and over again. And so I think it's an important story that we have to tell. And so I asked myself, what is my connection to it? At first it was morbid curiosity. As I grew older, it was, well, this is a huge part, this is an important story of our LGBTQI plus history, especially in Indiana. And then further past that, when I had this friend come up to me and say, well, you could have been at the house, then I realized that I could have been one of those forgotten victims, or my friend could have been one of those forgotten victims long before he ever got sober. Or many of my friends could have been those forgotten victims. And then I started thinking about people that I did know at that time, that I would meet out at a bar, and we would become friends, and we would become bar friends. And if you've ever gone to a bar regularly, you all have bar friends. And I started thinking about people, men that I did know at that time, that all of a sudden we would just be like, what happened to so-and-so? Well, did he move away? Where did he go? I don't know. Oh, I heard he moved to Ohio. And we would just assume that that was the case. Could I have possibly known somebody that was a victim of her Baumeister's that we all just assumed moved away somewhere, and we don't know where that person is today? That could be very well be a possibility. Because this is a case of a marginalized community being killed off, and not only that, but forgotten. So when I was thinking about this the other day, because I knew that I wanted to talk about this, and I wanted to kind of come back and revisit this, because every time I talk about it, more people contact me and bring me more information, and if more people bring me information, I will make videos about this. I am not afraid to make videos about this. And if people bring me information, if people want to do interviews about this, I will do interviews and I will bring more information out about this. And I was thinking about this, and I think that, one of the most horrifying things that her Baumeister did, right, in this whole situation, other than taking these men's lives, that, as horrific and tragic as it is, other than that, one of the most horrible things that he ever did was, A, he never took accountability, okay? When he ended up taking his life, what he did was he wrote a letter to his family, but he took no accountability for the actions, no accountability for the families whatsoever, right? And in that, what he did was he didn't leave any of the names of the victims, which he probably didn't know anyway, but he also didn't give any closure to the family members or to the friends that were left behind. He didn't give any closure to the community, right? You're talking about the arrogance and the narcissism, okay, of a serial killer, that it's more important for him. You want to talk about control. We're talking about control that is important to killers. The last bit of control that this man had was that I am going to die and I'm going to take all this information with me and I am going to leave the families and the friends forever not knowing anything about what happened to their family members or their friends, okay? I am going to leave these forgotten men forever forgotten because nobody will ever know who they are, except for bone fragment number 452 that might be identified 30 years from now by a DNA test because somebody signs up for Ancestry.com. That might be the only way, which wasn't even available 30 years ago. To think about how sick this man was, not just as a serial killer, okay, but that he was willing to take away the history of these people, their families, their stories, their dreams, their hopes, their friends, their love, what they had to offer this world. He was willing to do all that, okay? And when you think about that in that context, it's not just about killing somebody and their body. It's about killing everything about them, When my mom passed away, my mom was very, very sick. We were able to have a last conversation before she passed away months later. She said to me, when I go, do not become attached to my body. She said, because my body is just a bag of soul, and I am just the soul. But what her Baumeister did when he left and didn't give any names, didn't take any accountability, okay? Didn't say, this is where you might find them, or this is where I found them, or these are where the people are, or I know. He didn't know who these people's names were. He didn't care enough to know who these people's names were. To him, they were just a body. But to other people, they were souls. To other people, they were human beings that had stories, that had history, that had mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and friends and lovers and partners. They were people that had dreams, and he took all of that away from these people. And that's probably, for me, other than their lives being gone, the saddest tragedy of all of it. But control is too important, and even in death, he still has some control over their suffering. He still has control over the suffering of their families and the victims. Even in death, he still has that. And the reality is, he never knew their names to begin with. He might have known John or Mark or somebody like that, but he didn't know their names. He didn't know who they were. He didn't care. They were just thrill kills for him. He did not care enough to know who they were. They were just a medium for his practice. They were not human beings to him. They were not people that had families or dreams or friends or regrets. They were just bodies. And that's the saddest of it all. But I will continue to tell these stories because I think that these stories are important. I think it's important that we honor the victims that died in the wake of her Baumeister. He was just one man that didn't know the names of many of these men that represented so many of us that are blessed enough to still be alive today. And I think it's important to know those people's stories and to honor those people's stories. And I will continue to tell the story because I think it's important to know who those people were. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you know anything about this case, please contact me. My email is listed below. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.